the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, George and Jennie Sodder lived a contented life with their 9 children. As Christmas approached in 1945, the Sodder household buzzed with excitement and anticipation for the holiday festivities. On the night of December 24th, the family gathered around the dinner table, exchanging laughter and sharing their holiday joys. As the clock neared midnight, the children's excitement gave way to exhaustion, and one by one, they headed off to bed. 5 of the children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 6, decided to stay up a little longer to play with their new toys. The eldest son, Joe, 16, had to work early the next morning and retired to his room, leaving his siblings in the living room. In the dead of night, the Sodder parents were jolted awake by the sound of a loud thud on the roof and the smell of smoke filling the air. Panic set in as they realized that their home was on fire. George and Jennie frantically attempted to reach their children upstairs, but the fire had already spread, making it impossible for them to reach the second floor. Desperation consumed the Sodders as they tried to use the phone to call for help, only to discover that the line had been mysteriously cut. They ran to a neighbor's house to summon the fire department, but by the time the firefighters arrived, the inferno had engulfed the home. The firefighters immediately began battling the blaze, but they were unable to save the house from being reduced to ashes. In the aftermath of the fire, the Sodders faced a nightmare beyond imagination. 5 of their children were unaccounted for, and the devastating thought that they might have perished in the blaze was almost unbearable. George and Jennie held on to hope, clinging to the belief that their children could still be alive, but they had little evidence to support their optimism. As the local fire department began its investigation into the cause of the fire and the missing children, strange inconsistencies came to light. Normally, the remains of the victims of a fire would be found among the debris, but in this case, no human remains were discovered. The absence of bodies in the ashes raised suspicions that the children might not have been in the house when it burned down. The Sodders began to question the handling of the investigation by the local authorities. They couldn't comprehend why the fire department had been unable to determine the cause of the fire or find any remains. Furthermore, they felt that the search for their missing children was not as thorough and comprehensive as it should have been. As days turned into weeks, the doubts and questions continued to haunt the Sodder family. They hired private investigators to delve deeper into the case, hoping to find answers that the official investigation seemed unable or unwilling to provide. It became apparent to the Sodders that they would have to take matters into their own hands if they were to have any chance of unraveling the mystery behind the disappearance of their beloved children. As they began to delve deeper into the circumstances surrounding the fire, their doubts and questions only intensified. One of the first issues that raised red flags for the Sodders was the apparent mishandling of the fire investigation by the local authorities. George and Jennie felt that the fire department had not conducted a thorough examination of the scene. The lack of human remains in the ashes was baffling, and they wondered how the bodies of their children could have completely vanished in the blaze. The Sodders also questioned the cause of the fire itself. The official report from the fire department indicated that faulty wiring was to blame for the inferno. However, the family was certain that their electrical system was in good condition because they had recently had it inspected, and it had passed with no issues. They couldn't understand how a well-maintained electrical system could suddenly spark a deadly fire. Adding to their skepticism, the Sodders recalled an incident that occurred just days before the fire. A stranger had come to their home, offering to sell them life insurance. When George declined, the man became irate and warned him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. George dismissed the threat at the time, but in the aftermath of the fire, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the stranger's ominous words. As the Sodders continued their own investigation, they uncovered several strange anomalies. They found a ladder near the back of the house that seemed to have been moved, but none of the family members recalled using it. It appeared that someone might have used the ladder to access the second floor and potentially tamper with the wiring, raising suspicions of foul play. Furthermore, they found a few odd objects in the rubble, including a small, rubber object similar to a pineapple bomb that didn't belong to the family. These discoveries only fueled their belief that the fire had not been an accident. But perhaps the most perplexing aspect of the entire case was the conflicting reports and sightings of the missing children after the fire. Over the years that followed, numerous witnesses came forward claiming to have seen the Sodder children alive and well in various locations. The family received letters and photographs from people who believed they had spotted the missing siblings. One sighting, in particular, stood out. A woman claimed to have seen the children peering out of a car while the house was still burning. Another witness said they had seen the children in a vehicle passing through a nearby town. The Sodders followed up on these leads, but the trail always seemed to go cold, leaving them with more questions than answers. Despite the mounting evidence suggesting that the children might still be alive, the local authorities dismissed the sightings, considering them nothing more than false hope and coincidences. This dismissal only added to the frustration and anguish of the Sodder family, who was desperate to find their missing children and bring them back home. As the Sodder family continued their relentless pursuit of answers, the case took a bewildering turn with the emergence of conflicting reports and witnesses, each adding a new layer of complexity to the mystery of the missing children. Among the witnesses, a woman named Ida Crutchfield claimed that she saw the Sodder children peering out of a passing car on the night of the fire. According to her account, the children seemed to be in distress and were accompanied by several unknown adults. Ida's testimony seemed to corroborate the family's suspicions that the children might not have perished in the fire, igniting hope within the Sodder parents. Another sighting came from a woman in Charleston, West Virginia, who asserted that she had seen the 5 missing Sodder children approximately a week after the fire. They were in the company of 2 men and 2 women, all of whom seemed to be of Italian descent. The children were allegedly in a car with the Kentucky license plate. As word of these sightings spread, the Sodder family received several letters with postmarks from cities across the United States, all claiming to have seen the children. Some correspondents were even confident that the Sodder children were residing in distant states. Although the family was cautiously optimistic, they couldn't help but wonder why the children had not attempted to contact them if they were, in fact, alive and well. The family enlisted the help of private investigators to follow up on these leads, hoping that the authorities would take these sightings seriously and launch a nationwide search. Unfortunately, their efforts seemed to fall on deaf ears, as law enforcement remained skeptical of the veracity of these reports. The police chalked up the sightings to mistaken identity or the wishful thinking of those trying to be helpful. However, the Sodder family refused to be deterred. They distributed thousands of flyers, plastering pictures of their missing children across the country. The case gained national attention, with newspapers covering the story and radio broadcasts mentioning the disappearances. The media exposure led to an influx of tips, but the Sodders were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information and struggled to filter out the credible leads from the false ones. Despite the odds, the family held on to hope, firmly believing that their children were still alive and waiting to be found. George and Jennie continued to pursue their own investigation, even traveling to New York and other states following leads and sightings. Yet, as time passed, the trail grew colder, and the Sodders faced the painful realization that finding their children might be more difficult than they had ever imagined. Throughout the investigation, the family faced criticism and skepticism from some quarters, with whispers of publicity stunts and sensationalism. But the Sodders were undeterred, convinced that their children were out there somewhere, waiting to be brought back home. The lack of tangible evidence and the inability to locate the missing children fueled theories and speculations about what might have happened to them. Some believed that the children had been abducted and were being held against their will. Others theorized that they might have been sold into adoption or human trafficking networks. In 1968, the Sodders received a letter postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. The letter contained a photograph of a young man who resembled one of the missing Sodder children. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten note read, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 90132 or 35. This cryptic message only added to the intrigue surrounding the case, but it did little to provide concrete information about Louis's whereabouts. The family hired a private investigator to look into the lead, but once again, the trail went cold, and the man in the photograph was never identified. Years passed without any breakthroughs. The media attention eventually waned, and the case slipped from the headlines. The Sodders continued to live with heartache and uncertainty, never giving up hope that they would one day find their missing children. And as the years turned into decades, the case of the missing Sodder children remained unsolved, leaving the family and the community haunted by the enduring mystery. Despite their relentless efforts, the Sodders were never able to find conclusive answers about the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. George and Jennie Sodder carried the burden of their unanswered questions and the pain of not knowing what had happened to their beloved children until the end of their lives. The surviving Sodder children, who had lost their siblings that tragic Christmas Eve, continued their quest to find the truth. In Fayetteville, the mystery became part of local folklore, and the story was passed down from generation to generation. And the mysterious disappearance of the 5 siblings continues to puzzle the people in and out of their community, including the internet.
And with that, we have come to the end of our video. Please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and click that notification bell. This is Ben saying, see you next time.